Good morning, students. Myself Naina PB, lecturer from Government Polytechnic for Women's in Bangalore. Today we shall discuss about groundwater engineering and water resource management. Now we are in the 6th unit. By the end of this session, you will be knowing groundwater pollution, sources of groundwater pollution, principal sources, protection of wells, legislation provision for groundwater protection. Groundwater pollution. Groundwater resources are getting polluted due to over application of fertilizers and pesticides, indiscriminate disposal of effluents from industries, and urban sewages. So even surface water is getting polluted, that's different. So even we are polluting the groundwater. This is a very serious thing which we have to think about. Groundwater resources are getting polluted due to over application of fertilizers and pesticides. We apply fertilizers so that we should get the yield well. So over application of that will pollute the soil, in turn it pollutes the groundwater. So indiscriminate disposal of effluents from industries. So effluents from industries are directly disposed to the groundwater. So that also reduces the quality of the groundwater. And urban sewerage. So urban sewerage, if it is disposed without any treatment, the quality of groundwater will be reduced, which will affect the which will contaminate the groundwater, and in turn if you have the groundwater if you use that groundwater for domestic usage, it will adversely affect the health. Groundwater pollution is defined as artificially induced degradation of natural groundwater quality. So groundwater pollution is defined as artificially induced degradation of natural groundwater quality. Groundwater pollution can impair the use of water and can create hazards to public health through toxicity and spread of diseases. So groundwater pollution can impair the use of water and can create hazards to public health. So why? Because it contains toxic material and which will spread the diseases. In this picture, you can see how groundwater will get contaminated. See, here is a fertile land. So where pesticides and agricultural land where pesticides and fertilizers are used. So overuse of this, by using pesticides and fertilizers, soil will be mixed with pesticides and fertilizers, and the water will percolate deep into the earth. So that water will contain those particles of fertilizers which will contaminate the groundwater. You can see buried gasoline and solvent tanks here, so which will contaminate the groundwater. You can see the polluted air which causes acid rains like that, so which will again reduce the fertility of soil, and also it reaches the groundwater and contaminate the groundwater. You can see hazardous waste injection into the well here. You can see the gas pool septic tank and leakage from faulty casing. So if you do not case the pipe properly, the leakages may happen, and that leakage which contains hazard material will reach into the groundwater and contaminate the groundwater. You can see the confined aquifer groundwater flow here, so which will be contaminated by the landfill, accidental spills, waste lagoons. So you can see coal stripping and mine runoff here. So de-icing the road salt. So all these activities will pollute the groundwater. So we shall study step by step how groundwater is polluted. Sources of groundwater pollution. We can classify the sources as point source and non-point source. Point source originates from a single location. For example, storage tank, landfill, pipeline, releases, etc. Non-point sources are from agricultural and runoff seepage. So point sources originate from a single location. It can be storage tank, landfill, pipeline release, etc. So non-point sources are from agricultural runoff seepage. You can see groundwater contamination here. So where landfill is there, seepage percolation. So this is termed as a point source, where storage tank and pipeline releases the toxic materials, where leakage in pipeline occurs and it enters toxic materials enters the groundwater. So uses of fertilizers and pesticides are termed as non-point sources, which comes under agricultural runoff seepage. Principal sources of groundwater pollution. So it can be further divided as municipal sources, industrial sources, agricultural sources, and miscellaneous sources. So agricultural field will also pollute the groundwater. Industrial sources like oil, gas, wells will also deplete the groundwater and in turn contaminates the groundwater. So road salts. So municipal sources, where septic tank comes under this one, and miscellaneous sources. You can see the picture here where landfill or waste is buried into the earth, dumped on the earth and buried into the earth. So which contains toxic material and reaches the groundwater here. Okay, coming to the municipal sources. So municipal sources, there are three types: sewer leakage, liquid waste, solid waste. Sources are like this for sewer leakage: defective sewer pipes, breakage by tree roots, rupture from heavy load, earthquakes, losses of foundation support. So these comes under sewer leakage. And effects of sewer leakages are high concentration of BOD, biological oxygen demand, and COD, chemical oxygen demand, nitrate, organic chemicals, bacteria, and heavy metals. The next type is liquid waste, which includes the source as domestic waste and runoff. So the effects are like this: bacteria, viruses, traces of elements of heavy metals, inorganic and organic chemicals may enter into the groundwater. The third one is solid waste. So source for solid waste is landfills. So laxity, iron, manganese and nitrate and traces of these elements may contaminate the groundwater. The second principal source is industrial source. So even in industrial source, the types are liquid waste, tank and pipeline leakage, mining activities. So for liquid waste, the source is industrial wastewater discharge into pits, ponds, lagoons, deep well injections, where liquid waste of industries is buried into the deep well injections. Industrial wastewater discharge into pits, ponds, etc. The effects of this liquid waste of industries are: it releases hazardous and toxic waste into the groundwater, tank and pipeline leakages. So gasoline station, fuel or oil tanks, petroleum products from pipelines and tanks. Immiscible liquids and liquid radioactivity are the effects of tank and pipeline leakages. The third one is mining activities, which includes coal, phosphate and uranium mines, domes, sand and gravel quarries. So which will have low pH and reduces the pH value of the groundwater, so that groundwater will be acidic. The third source is agricultural source. Under agricultural source, we have agricultural runoff, animal waste, fertilizers and soil amendments, pesticides, insecticides and herbicides. So for agricultural runoff, the sources are surface channel or joins the underlying water. So the effect of agricultural runoff is salinity, bicarbonates of sulfates and chlorides and nitrates. So the animal waste from slaughterhouses, salts, organic loads, bacteria and nitrates, and fertilizers and soil amendments. So leachate of phosphate and potassium fertilizers, soil amendments like lime, gypsum, sulfur. So this increases the salinity of soil, and even uses of pesticides, insecticides and fertilizers. So leachate, the pesticides, insecticides and herbicides affects the potability of water. So the last type is miscellaneous source. So in this, spills and surface discharge, surface water and salt water are the types. Dumping of fluids on ground, flushing hazard flammable liquids into water, uh, washing aircrafts with solvents and spills of fuels at airports can form a layer of hydrocarbon floating on the water. So where it affects the groundwater. Surface water. Polluted surface water bodies that contribute to groundwater recharge. And salinity of groundwater will be increased. So you can see here in this picture, well water, these are groundwater aquifer, water table. So fuel material will contaminate the groundwater. So use of fertilizers and pesticides will also contaminate the groundwater. Now, how can we protect groundwater or wells? So the pollution in groundwater tend to be removed or reduced in concentration with time and with distance traveled. All of a sudden, we can't change the quality of groundwater. It is a very slow and gradual process. So the pollutants in groundwater tend to be removed or reduced in concentration with time and with distance traveled. The rate of pollution attenuation depends on the type of pollutant and on local hydrological situation. Once groundwater gets contaminated, it may be difficult or expensive to clean up. So once groundwater is contaminated, it may be difficult or expensive to clean it up. The best way to deal with groundwater contamination is not to contaminate in the first place. So once the groundwater is get contaminated, it's very difficult to clean it up. It's a long procedure and which will take uh, which is more expensive and which will take a very long time. Hence, the best way to deal with groundwater contamination is not to contaminate the groundwater at all. There are some of the precautions how we can protect our groundwater. So the first one is we should dispose the chemicals properly. We should dilute it and then dispose it. We should never dispose the concentrated chemicals into the groundwater. Take used motor oil to recycling center. So used motor oil should not be disposed here and there. So it should be taken to the recycling center. Limit the amount of fertilizers on plants. So using more amount of fertilizers on plants is not recommended in the point of view of groundwater. Next, get involved in water education, enforcement against improper waste disposal, locate well away from stream or lake, avoid sensitive groundwater areas and landfill for landfill, reduce waste by recycling, test wells regularly for potential contamination, avoid water tables for buried sites. Next is provide local disposal facilities for unused chemicals and chemical contaminated. Proper installation and maintenance of leak testing and inventory control of groundwater storage tanks. Do not dispose household chemicals into septic tank system. Careful adjustment of fertilizer application to plants needs and timings for maximum growth benefits. Storage of animal manure to facilitate land spreading at appropriate times. Reduces pesticides use in recharge area of site. Encourage alternative pest control methods. Zoning to calculate heavy users of hazard materials away from sensitive groundwater areas. Regular inspection and maintenance of pipelines should be done. You can see the picture where rainwater after traveling through industrial waste and all is when it directly discharged to the surface water or groundwater, it will affect the aquatic animals. When the waste or rainwater is treated well and then discharged to the groundwater, it doesn't affect the aquatic life. So our government has made many legislation provisions for groundwater protection. Central government has published certain framework laws relating to sustainable water usage. To protect groundwater dredging and to take safeguard against overexploitation, Government of India in 1970 formed a model groundwater control and regulation bill for adoption by states. It is revised in 1972, 1996 and 2005. The bill provides framework to regulate indiscriminate extraction of groundwater. In 2005, rainwater harvesting was introduced to recharge the groundwater. In 2011, model bills for groundwater management, and in 2013, National Water Framework Bill is used. And in 2015, Ministry of Urban Development has included provision for rainwater harvesting in building. So after 2015, whatever the buildings are used, it should in plan it should show rainwater harvesting. So it is a compulsory thing made by building bylaws. National water policy establishes water regulatory authority in each state. Ministry of Rural Development also implements certain program on groundwater management. Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change also responsible for prevention and control of groundwater contamination. About 11 states and 4 union territories have adopted and implemented groundwater legislation of model bills. Rainwater harvesting is mandatory in all buildings having plot size 100 square meter. WRA will fix and regulate water tariff on volume basis and reviewed periodically. So prevention says prevention pays, remedy costs. Prevention is in your hand or in our hand, but remedy is not in our hand. So we can prevent the groundwater contamination. Coming to the MCQs, groundwater resources are getting polluted due to overuse of fertilizers and pesticides, indiscriminate disposal of effluents from industries, urban sewage, all of the above. Obviously, the answer is all of the above. Groundwater pollution can impair the use of water, create hazards to public health through toxicity or spread of disease, both A and B, none of these. The answer is both A and B. The next question is, presence of excess of arsenic, fluoride, iron in groundwater is not permissible for human consumption. The second statement is like this: activities on groundwater surface will not affect the quality of groundwater below. First sentence is false and second sentence is true. The answer is first sentence is true and the second sentence is false. So activities on ground surface will directly affect the groundwater table. And then presence of excess of arsenic fluoride iron in groundwater is not permissible for human consumption. The next MCQ is, which of the following is not a point source of groundwater pollution? Agricultural runoff, storage tank, landfill, pipelines. It is agricultural runoff. Agricultural runoff is surface type of groundwater pollution source. The next question is, principal source of groundwater pollution are municipal source, agricultural source, industrial source and miscellaneous source. Answer is all the above. The rate of pollution attenuation depends on the type of pollutant, local hydraulic situation, both A and B, none of A and B. So the answer is both A and B. Groundwater of India formed a model groundwater control and regulation bill for adoption by states in year 2011 or 1970, 2013 and 2015. The answer is 1970. Rainwater harvesting was introduced to recharge groundwater in a year 2010, 1970, 2003 and 2005. The answer is 2005. Water Regulatory Authority was established by, the answer is National Water Policy. Water Regulatory Authority is related to fixation and regulation of water runoff. These are the references. Okay. Thank you, students.